Open the doors now. Hi, I'm Michael Page. Start with my bit about my long and checkered past. So I'm from the UK, as you can probably guess. I've been a registered nurse for 30 years, probably a bit more than 30 years actually now. Originally started in critical care, intensive care for many years. My first big breakthrough success was working on an international research study at University College called Whitehall II, which was run by an eminent guy called Professor Michael Marmot, and he was the godfather of modern epidemiology, or is, he's still alive. And he talked about social determinants of health, which is sort of reverberated through my career. I stayed in ICU nursing for many years, came over to Australia in 2006, and was involved in change management in acute hospitals. I worked on a thing called critical care without walls, where myself and a friend of mine who I trained with set up a system within a private hospital in Brisbane where we provided acute nursing interventions at night on acute wards to try and prevent deterioration of patients. It was very successful over the 3 years period. We were published, we won some awards, and published figures showed we reduced cardiac arrest by 50% and pre-ICU deaths in the hospital by 66% just by introducing that nurse-led service. So from that, after that sort of came to an end, a few years later, I moved to Adelaide, where I'm now. And by chance, really ended up in the aged care sector. So I worked briefly for the Aged Care Commission as a surveyor to get some sort of inside knowledge into the new standards that were coming out. And I was lucky enough to have a contract with what is now Dementia Training Australia. It was called Dementia Training Study Centres back in the day, working at Alzheimer's Australia here in Adelaide. I realised how little I knew about dementia, even having worked in nursing for all those years, and really was given the opportunity of 8 months of teaching myself alongside running a national program called Portrait Mirror Landscape, which looked at strengths-based communication in dementia and the language that we use in dementia. So we were talking about responsive behaviours at that time. And when that contract ended through funding changes, I was asked by a small private provider in Adelaide called Ananda Aged Care to come in and advise them on how they should transition to the new aged care standards. That was a really interesting first insight. So I did a lot of discovery work, talking to management, but also talking to staff on the floor about what the priorities were and what the changes to this thing called person-centered care were going to be. And I found two things quite quickly. Management would say they were communicating so much and no one's listening. And the staff would say, we're hearing nothing, we don't know what's going on. So that was quite interesting. I basically advised them to focus on three big but focused areas, which was introducing a model of care, which we called the resident focused care model. How do we move this monolith of task focus that we've trained everyone so well in over the years to truly be person-centered rather than just stick a mission statement on the wall? Improving the dining experience, and not just the food, but the meaningful engagement and the activity around the mealtime experience was very important. And just that breaking down silos that existed. So one of the things we did was we merged the teams, the nursing team, the care team, the lifestyle team. We had a very, what I called cruise ship entertainment model of lifestyle. So we had the bingo, we had some outings that 10 people went on out of 132 or whatever it was in one of the homes. So we merged that, and we went through a process of taking people on the journey of like, how are we going to get to person-centered care? We're not just going to say it's going to come in like in 3 weeks' time. It's not realistic. So we worked from the bottom up rather than top down. And I spent a lot of time on the floor with carers, with lifestyle people, with cleaners, maintenance guys, whoever, about what does good look like. And as part of that process, we were able to literally open the doors. So I floated the idea, which was always in my mind, that I don't like locked doors in memory support units. And in fact, we didn't call them memory support units because often I go into these places and I don't see there's any memory support happening.
Yeah.
It's just a name. So as you can imagine, that engendered quite a lot of fear in many people, and there was resistance to that change. But when we finally went through with opening the doors, it was almost immediately evident that the people weren't going to form an escape committee and all leave the building or go around beating up all the other residents. That didn't happen at all. And just the fact that the staff didn't have to shadow residents with dementia around the place, they can let them go and sit where they liked and go out in the garden and play basketball in some cases and all those other things.
On that, did you sense and see visually like almost a relaxation on people as well?
Absolutely. I mean, as I say, it was that breaking through that preconceived idea of this is how it was. To me, being locked up in a small confined area means that all those residents are in the fight or flight syndrome. Their blood pressure is high, their heart rate is high, they're in distress, and the distress is what causes the conflict that then gets labeled as responsive behaviors or aggression or whatever you want to call it. This was all coming from the right place. Care workers were fearful, and they've been taught to be fearful of anyone having a fall, which is obviously an important consideration in duty of care. But that conversation between where, it's a very grey area around where duty of care aligns with dignity of risk. And for sure, we had it far too much in the duty of care arena and not nearly enough in dignity of risk. And I'll give you another example at the other home, which was a smaller home. It was a 7-bedded memory support unit, and it was only female residents in there, which was quite good. But it was quite a small area, and for the whole day, the residents were sat around a dining table with a big plasma screen TV behind them. And every time one of those ladies stood up, someone put their hand on the shoulder and said, "Sit down, sit down, sit down," all day long. The staff had been trained that they were fearful of allowing people to fall. And lo and behold, people were falling as soon as they stood up because they were on psychotropic medications. Yeah. So once we went through the process saying, we need to have a deprescription plan in place for these people. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But for some, it had spectacular, almost not overnight, but quite rapid success, such that we left the doors completely open between, after breakfast and till dinner time. And we took over an adjacent lounge and made it a Mediterranean themed room because most of the residents were from Italy or Greece. And a volunteer came in and did Mediterranean dancing and singing. We had residents that had never vocalized in ages who were singing old Calabrian songs fluently and dancing and cooking with knives and chopping vegetables and doing all that stuff. The change process took 3 months probably to really work through. And I'm continually told change needs at least 18 months. When we talk about change management, how do you open the doors? This is a literal opening the doors, but whichever doors you're trying to open, you kind of have to have a vision that's clear, fairly simple, and you have to paint a picture of what that looks like. This can happen. It isn't easy, but we can do this, and it can be much better, and both for residents and staff, and the environment to work in is transformed by that as well.
I constantly hear, it takes 18 months, it takes X amount of time, and I've seen it in moments. I've seen it, as you've said, over a couple of months. Maybe that's something we need to sort of unblock in regards to how long it takes.
Classically, you will see in any locked unit, you'll have at least one resident who's standing by that door all day long, looking out at what they're not allowed to go to. Yeah. As soon as you open the door, that person doesn't go out and become aggressive. It's completely the opposite. They're almost instantly undistressed. They're relaxed by that. And they may not. And this is what we found with one of the homes. We opened the doors and no one went out.
I ran a case conference some time ago and I questioned the beautiful garden why I couldn't take Nev out there because it was locked all the time. And I questioned it and they said, well, we can't see him when he goes out there because we can't see where he goes and he might fall. The nurse practitioner said, do we have cameras in their rooms? And they said, what do you mean? She said, do we have cameras in their rooms? Can we see them in their rooms? And she said, no. And she said, so what if they fell in their room? We wouldn't see them. So I don't understand the difference. Why are we wanting to see everything they do? And so lock the doors. And so I guess that's something that took a long time to change. And it didn't seem to change. So I left that service. So my question is, we talk about communication not being reached to the bottom, and the bottom saying there's nothing coming from the top, and the top saying it's clear. How do we fix that as leaders?
From my perspective, it's just a change of mindset, because as managers, leaders, especially if you're a large provider, there's a danger that, you know, you're like the generals in the old-fashioned wars of sitting back, giving out directions about how you see things should be. And you have no idea what's actually happening in reality on the floor, and the communication that's getting down to that. I find people in care work want to care. You know, there's this, I keep hearing it, carers these days don't care and all this rubbish. You know, young people don't care, overseas workers don't care, they're just doing it as a job. I don't see that, but I see they do feel the need to follow what they think management is telling them. And it's not clear. The vision isn't there. And one moment it's do this task-orientated thing, and no, tomorrow, now you need to forget all that and do something completely different. It's extremely confusing, especially in services I'm sure you would have seen where the management change every year. There's new management and they have new different ways of doing things. We tend to introduce change from the top up, and where I've seen it work well, particularly in flu outbreaks before COVID and then in COVID, but certainly in this transition to person-centered care, is find out who your champions are and give them the tools to do the job and just get out of their way, whether they're carers, maintenance guys, lifestyle, nurses. Within the framework of what you're trying to achieve, just support them and ask them questions of why are we not supplying you to get these improvements. Usually you will find people will step up and take ownership of that and drive the care at that level. Compliance is not quality. I said to the owners at Ananda, we're setting the bar very low and failing to achieve it, because they were so fearful of the commission and the new aged care standards. That's all everyone was talking about for 2-3 years. And I truly believe this is that if you provide the care in the first place, you know, genuine care, relationship-based care. But if you genuinely try to provide that care at that level, you don't need to worry about compliance, and you don't need a whole corporate team of people trying to tick boxes to keep the commission happy. And that's what we were doing. We were so focused on the commission that we were taking our eyes off actually providing person-centered care.
In terms of culture change, do we talk enough about managing resistance?
I think resistance is a very real thing, and it's normally driven by people's lack of understanding about what's trying to be achieved. So if we can paint what the actual picture is and a clear goal, and then we can bring people on the journey, we can get through it. How did you see any of that working?
In any change, there's a tipping point where you get momentum going. You've got to communicate before. You've got to paint a picture or a vision, and it's got to be one, not that we're directing or dictating. What would your team members think about this? When you ask them, you know, how do you find standing behind someone and telling them to sit down all day? If you could see a really lovely environment here, what would it look like? Together we can actually get there. The analogy is you're sort of building a plane while it's already in midair. Again, simplistic view, but you have to have everyone on board, at least to say that I'm not completely anti this and I think it's a crazy idea. You have to at least have people think, I would like to work in a place where we didn't have to lock people in. I would like them to have that opportunity. I would like not to be worried that everyone's going to fall because they're sedated. And if you haven't got that, you're not going to get very far. So you have to have buy-in from your teams that we kind of want to do this, and then you have to consult with them. And our teams were confident enough. They believed us and they wanted that success. They wanted to see that work. The first couple of days, there was fear and anxiety. How are we going to keep track on them? And I say, look, you don't have to keep track on them. just keep an eye on things and deal with situations as they arise. It was interesting to see how quickly people just said, yeah, I like this. I don't fully understand it, but I want to know more about why is this working? Why is this actually easier? So I said, look, you don't believe me, but in 3 months' time, your jobs will be easier. You'll have more time to spend talking to people, sitting having cups of tea. You just wait. You try as a team, not me telling you what to do, but you as a team work out what works. And you'll see in 3 months' time, you'll be sitting having cups of tea with residents and going out in the garden, and your job will be more enjoyable, and usually it is.
At that 3-month point, did people come back and say they felt that it had improved?
At the same time, we employed a lot of education through Dementia Training Australia, and we published in the Australian Journal of Dementia Care a few papers on the experience. And yes, exactly that. We did pre and post surveys on competence in providing person-centred care and also enjoyment of working in there. And I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but very significant rises in all three of those. They just felt empowered. They felt they understood dementia far more. It flipped their mindset from we're managing patients or managing residents to meeting their needs as much as possible and building on their strengths, which just had a synergistic effect. I won an ARIA grant, research grant, looking at the effect of the environment and education. And this is an interesting concept I have, is I asked, they had 12 homes, and they're very different homes, different style homes. And I said, for this research grant, we're going to focus on changing the environment, maximizing the environment in 3 MSUs, alongside education around meaningful engagement and setting up the environment and all that stuff. But the question I have is, what are we? Are we a home? Are we a clinical facility, or are we a hotel? Because different homes we have could fall into either one or even 2 or 3 of those categories. And the question, and I didn't get an answer. And I said, this is important, because if I'm a member of staff and you're telling me I work for hotel services, my mindset is I am working in a hotel delivering service, not building relationships. One of my mottos is residents value relationships rather than tasks. And that's again, breaking down the silos was very important in the first example, because it wasn't just about opening the doors and that's fine. It's that understanding that everyone who interacts with a resident has an opportunity to create a positive environment, situation, or a negative one, or more often a neutral one, where it's an interaction but it's not meaningful, if that makes sense. Lovely talking to you, and
So nice to meet
Thank you so much.
All good. Nice to meet you.
See you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you, Michael.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.